Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2024 K-State Garden Hour webinar series. We are so glad you can join us today. If you are unfamiliar, this webinar series began in 2020 and has been a collaboration of the entire K-State Horticulture Extension team. Since the start of this program, we have reached over 62,000 gardeners just like you. We are pleased to continue offering the K-State Garden Hour series for free. If you have enjoyed these educational webinars, please consider making a tax-deductible donation to support this program. The link to donate can be found in the chat or on our K-State Garden Hour website. This webinar is hosted by K-State Research and Extension. I am Anthony Reardon. I am the Horticulture Small Farms Extension Agent for Johnson County, Kansas, and I am your host today. Everyone involved in the development of this series is an extension professional for K-State. Most of us have a background in horticultural education or a related discipline, but most of all, we each have a love for educating and sharing important gardening topics. Before we get started, we do have a couple of housekeeping notes to cover. Please use the Q&A feature for questions related to the presentation. This is where we will look for questions at the end of the webinar and during the Q&A session. You should see a button along the bottom of the tab that says Q&A. Just click on that and you will be able to enter your question. Today's webinar will be recorded and we will post it to the K-State Garden Hour website. We typically upload additional resources related to each topic as well. If we share links through the chats, we will also link them on the website. Our website is also where you will have access to previous topics and upcoming topics in the 2024 season. Our moderators today are Terry Roberts and Kala Edwards, and they will be sharing information through the chat during the presentation. They will also help us facilitate the Q&A portion of the webinar. Today's topic is establishing a more environmentally sustainable lawn. I am pleased to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Sharon Ashworth with Douglas County Extension. Please give us a few moments while we transition and share the presentation slides.
Let's try that again. What did I say at the top? That in practice it worked and then now it's not. What are people seeing out there?
We currently see your slides, Sharon. If you want to try to hit the presentation mode.
There we go. Does that work? Okay, there we go. Great. Well, thanks for that. I knew there was going to be a little hiccup, but thanks and welcome to the Garden Hour. So I'm Sharon Ashworth. I'm out here in Northeast Kansas in Douglas County. And so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about may be focused on the typical turf grass we see here, which is tall fescue, but I will be covering other types of turf grass as well as alternatives to turf grass in today's presentation. So I want to start with some definitions. So first of all, turf, that upper stratum of soil bound by grass and plant roots in a thick mat. The picture there on the right shows what we typically think of when we think of turf. And so that turf grass might be tall fescue, it might be zoysia, it might be Bermuda grass, it might be Kentucky bluegrass. So that's what I mean by turf. Lawn, however, can take on a broader meaning. So by lawn, when I talk about a lawn, I'm talking about a relatively short, uniform ground cover. It does not necessarily mean a turf grass. Lawn can be a number of things, and we'll get to that. We'll talk about that as well. So a garden then is going to be a place where you have a variety of plants that are a variety of heights, blooms, textures. Just think about your vegetable garden or your flower garden, your shrub garden. And then, of course, your yard is what is going to encompass all of this, your trees, your shrubs, your flower gardens, and whatever it is that you're using as a lawn, which remember can be something besides turf grass. Now, we're going to start by talking about the turf lawn, weighing the pros and cons. So I know there's a lot out there about replacing lawns and the environmental impact of lawns, and we'll get to that. But I do want to remind everybody that turf grasses are plants. They're filtering air, filtering water, they're absorbing carbon dioxide, producing oxygen. And there certainly are many situations where turf grass lawn is appropriate and appreciated. So that grass that is holding the soil in place, it's going to reduce erosion. Those roots from the grass plants are going to improve water filtration. Grass lawns help to cool the environment. And of course, they're aesthetically pleasing. We like to look at them and we like to play on them. So all these are good things about turf grass lawns if they're properly maintained. And that's where we're getting to, is some of these maintenance issues that come with trying to get a thick, healthy lawn. So here is just sort of a generalized, simple routine of care for a typical fescue turf grass if you want a nice looking green lawn. So we've got your pre-emergence, we've got 3 episodes of fertilization, we've got insecticides maybe for grub control, we've got another pre-emergent in the fall for those winter annual weeds, we've got aeration to help with compaction, there's often reseeding involved. And of course, that means a lot of mowing, a lot of watering. It does mean air pollution if you're using a gas mower, and of course, noise. I mean, we've all been in the situation where you finally get your coffee out on your patio, your deck, out on your yard, and your neighbor fires up that mower. So there's a lot of maintenance that goes around and a lot of environmental impact, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So some of the reasons that turfgrass lawns are getting some bad press is because they take up nearly 4 times as much irrigated land as irrigated corn in this country. There's a lot of turfgrass lawn out there. Now, this is a statistic from 2005. It was a NASA study, and I have been unable to find an update from 2005. So I haven't been able to update that statistic, but it's a lot of turfgrass lawn out there. And the great impact of that collectively, I want to focus in on this statement here that small actions on individual properties add up to continental scale environmental changes. All that turfgrass lawn that we have throughout the country is replacing native vegetation. And because of that coverage, we have really lost much of our pollinator diversity. Our native plants support our native pollinators, no matter where you are, and replacing that native vegetation with a monotype of some kind of turfgrass results in the loss of biodiversity. In order to maintain that turfgrass lawn, we're often misapplying fertilizer, and any excess fertilizer that we have in our lawns often ends up in our waterways and eventually goes to the Gulf of Mexico, where oxygen is depleted, and what is called the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico results in that dead zone. So that's a collective impact, environmental impact of maintaining lawns. So another fun thing though, well, somewhat of a fun thing, is that if you know the name of your neighbor and sort of have a community in your neighborhood, you are actually more likely to irrigate your lawn and to fertilize your lawn, possibly over fertilizing your lawn. And that's that peer pressure that we feel to maintain a certain standard in our lawn. And that may lead to some practices that are not sustainable. So what we're going to talk about is maintaining that turf if you want to have turf, but making it a little bit more environmentally sustainable. So there's some initial steps before we embark on a transition to a more sustainable lawn. So here's what we're trying to avoid. What happens when you just stop everything? So that previous slide where I had that list of all the things that need to be done to maintain a good quality lawn, the mowing, the watering, the herbicides and pesticides. This is what happens if you just stop all that and maybe do the occasional mow down to the ground before the neighbors complain. This is what we end up with. So you end up with compacted soil. With compacted soil, the roots can't get down into the soil. The plants die off. You end up with exposed soil, which reduces water infiltration. It creates soil erosion and the growth and spread of weeds. Now we'll get to the subjective nature of the term weeds. But I know in some of my neighborhood yards where they've basically done this, where I'm going to be more environmentally friendly, so I'm just going to stop maintaining my lawn. Now we have Johnson grass, which is a noxious weed in some of our yards in our neighborhoods. So some of these weeds that come in, the dandelions and the violets and the clover, do support a few more pollinators. But I'm going to assume that really what we're not looking for is what's in the picture. That's not our end goal. So we're going to talk about doing this in a more purposeful way rather than just stopping the maintenance of a lawn. So some initial steps that everybody should consider before embarking on this transition is you really need to think about how it is you use your landscape. How do you use or want to use your landscape? Where do you recreate? What are the traffic patterns? If you grow food, where are you growing it? Do you want to grow food? Where would you put your garden, your food garden? Where would you put your flower garden beds? You need to understand the traffic and the use of your yard. So it's really great to draw a diagram of your yard and put down where it is you spend your time and how you spend your time in that landscape. And then on top of that, identify the sunny and shady parts of the yard and how they overlap with that first consideration about how you recreate in the traffic patterns. Are you putting up the soccer nets for the kids to play in the sunny parts, in the shady parts? Do you have your lawn chairs in the sunny parts or the shady parts? Where's that traffic pattern? Is that traffic pattern under the trees, along the edge of the bed? Is it right through the middle of the sunny part of the yard? You really need to understand how you're using that landscape and the sun and shade features of your yard before you can decide what options you have for creating a more environmentally sustainable lawn. And then you need to think about how much time and effort and expense you want to spend on pursuing activities, like mowing, weeding, and watering. There are some folks that just really live for that time where they've got maybe that Sunday afternoon, they've got a riding mower and they're out on their lawn, and that's me time. And people really enjoy that, and that's fine. But maybe you're one of those people that just really doesn't want to power up that mower again. You just can't stand the fact that you have to mow twice a week, and it's effort. It's too much effort. It's too noisy, and you want to do something. You'd rather be spending your time in your flower bed, let's say. So try to think about what you want to do in your yard and what you want to spend time doing before you choose an option. So let's think about those options we have. So first we'll talk about improved turf. So when I talk to people about changing up their lawn practices, I try to suss out what it is people are really looking for. I ask them what they're really envisioning by a low input lawn, low with fewer resources devoted to the lawn. So sometimes what people really want is just improved turf. They want a healthier lawn with more sustainable practices. That's what they really want and need. Then there are some people who really want to lower the inputs to their lawn. So they're going to tolerate what some might call weeds, violets and clover, for instance. So we're going to tolerate that in order to lower the inputs into our lawn. Another option is some change. So some people want an alternative turf grass, or something that looks like turf, but it's better for the environment and less maintenance. And we'll talk about those options as well. And then there are folks who the lawn, so remember, low growing ground cover, it does not need to be turf or to look like turf. It could be flowering plants, but it still needs to be short. And that's what we'll focus on for replacing a turf grass lawn. Now, there's plenty of other resources out there and garden hour episodes on taking your turf lawn and turning it into a garden. But what we're going to focus on this is if you really need to have it be that short ground cover for whatever reason. So let's take that first thing, the improved lawn. Now I'm going to focus on the tall fescue on here. That's certainly the more common recommended for your general landscape, certainly here in eastern Kansas. We'll talk a little bit about alternative turfs later on, specifically for those drier areas. So let's say you have something like this picture on the left here with you've got some grass, maybe Bermuda grass, you've got some weeds. And so you're going to renovate because you want that healthy looking tall fescue turf that's showing there on the right. So you're going to need to aerate to get rid of the compacted soil. You're going to have to apply herbicides. You can reseed, you can fertilize, you can do some careful watering to renovate that lawn, or you're just going to start over with sod, which is expensive, but is an option. So once you get to that tall fescue turf grass, the maintenance is also going to include aeration, herbicide application, reseeding, fertilizing, and watering. But what I want to point out here is a properly maintained lawn needs fewer of these inputs over time. And that's what we're talking about, is cutting down the resources that you have to put into doing that. And a properly maintained lawn is going to reduce those inputs. So one of the first things to consider, especially when we talk about those initial steps about how you use your lawn, think about how you might limit your turf grass. And the best thing to do is limit the turf grass to areas that are suited for turf grass growth. So those areas that get adequate sun, that you can water, and maybe that you need for either defining large sections of your yard or for those traffic areas, those recreational areas, those traffic ways. Think about where you need to use turf grass as turf grass and where it can grow. Every year we all get questions about trying to grow grass under trees. And what people end up doing is reseeding and watering. If you really want a thick grass under your tree, you're going to have to reseed every year. It takes fertilizer, it takes watering, and you're better off not trying to grow turf grass under your trees and substituting that with mulch or with a ground cover. And certainly, I mean, that's something to talk to your local horticulture agent about various options for putting under your tree. And you're going to be better off limiting that turf grass to areas suited for turf grass, because that's where it's going to be happy and healthy and grow well for you. So use that turf grass where it's needed. And for the remaining areas, for those areas of turf where you've decided, okay, I need turf here, it's a suitable place for turf, I've got plenty of sun, I can water it, I need to recreate here, I want to walk here, maintain that thick, healthy turf grass. So, and how you're going to do that, I'm not going to go through in detail. We do have a publication called Tall Fescue Lawns, and we also have 2 garden hours, parts 1 and 2 on fall lawn care. And so I highly recommend this publication and these presentations for details on how to maintain that thick, healthy lawn. So a few points to highlight for fertilization. So you want to reduce the amount of fertilizer that you're using on your turfgrass lawn. So right away, one of the things you should do is accurately calculate the area of turfgrass to fertilize and accurately calibrate your spreader. And that way you're going to target the area you need and how much you need. That's going to save you, it's going to save you money, and it's going to save you from excessive fertilization. You might choose an organic fertilizer for healthy soil. So an organic fertilizer is going to add more than just your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. It's going to add some organic matter to your soil. And there's a list of some options: animal manures, biosolids, blood meal, and compost. But you should recognize the difference between these organic fertilizers and a synthetic fertilizer. Most organic fertilizers are slow release. And also, you still have to look at the proper ratio of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And the way to do that, of course, is to get a soil test. So what's more important than the organic versus inorganic is using the right nutrient at the right time in the right amount. And how you decide or how you find that out is to go ahead and get a soil test. So talk to your local extension agent and get a soil test for your lawn. And then you know you won't be over fertilizing. So that is key. Excessive fertilization is only going to run off our lawns, into our streets, and then eventually into our water bodies. So for a more environmentally sustainable turfgrass lawn, make sure you get your fertilization right. Irrigation. Here's some features about how we irrigate our lawns. A lot of it is wasted. 50% of our water, it's either lost to wind, evaporation, runoff. We need to pay attention to our irrigation systems, make sure they're not inefficient. The middle statement there says, a household with an automatic landscape irrigation system that is not properly maintained can waste up to 25,000 gallons of water annually. And if you think about it, what we're using is our treated drinking water for our lawns. Unless you have a gray water system, we are using treated drinking water. This is expensive and wasteful and very critical note for especially those out in more western Kansas where that is a critical resource. So how do you reduce the water use in your turfgrass lawn? It's by watering carefully, water deeply and infrequently. And so what I have on the screen here is just some rules of thumb. But what I recommend is to go ahead and get a rain gauge for your yard. I mean, you can use ones that are online, but if you have something stuck somewhere in your yard, and get a rain gauge and pay attention to the weather, the temperature, the precipitation, the wind, just sort of to be able to adjust when it is that your lawn needs water. Now, one way to reduce the amount of water that your turfgrass lawn needs, your fescue lawn needs, is to let it go dormant over the summer. And what's key to that is not putting down that May fertilizer. If you skip the May fertilizer, if you put the May fertilizer on, what you're doing is you want your lawn to green up and grow through the summer, which means you need to water it and you need to mow it. And so if you don't want to do that, if you want to reduce your watering and your fertilizing and your mowing, let it go dormant over the summer. Now, you still will need to water it, and there's a rule of thumb there for when it's really dry. But you can also watch your lawn and decide whether or not it needs it. So that turf grass, that top picture, it might be hard to see, but there's a kind of a purplish cast that the turf grass can take on that lets you know that it's drought stricken and needs to be watered. Maybe an easier way to tell is if you go out in the morning and you walk across your lawn and then you come back maybe a couple hours later and you can still see your footprints in that lawn, then your turf grass needs watering. It is drought stressed. Another thing to do is to mow high. If you mow high, you're shading the soil. You're not going to lose as much water through evaporation if your turf grass is actually shading the soil. So get a rain gauge, pay attention to the weather, and pay attention to your turf condition, and you can reduce the amount of water you're using to maintain your turf grass lawn. Weed control. So cutting a lawn too short, like that, for one of those first pictures I showed when somebody just sort of scalps their lawn, that's exposing soil. It's exposing weed seed to light. And so if you cut your lawn higher, you're going to shade that, again, shade the soil, so you prevent evaporation, but you're also preventing light from getting to the weed seeds. So the rule of thumb is to not cut your grass more than 1/3 of the grass blade, the length of the grass blade at one time. And tall fescue should be no shorter than 3 inches. So that is a key feature of weed control, is a thick, healthy, properly mowed lawn. So if you do develop an undesirable quantity of weeds in your lawn, we have a publication for that too, Weed Control in the Home Lawns, which is an excellent publication that really lets you know when you have to treat and what you have to treat. So a good weed control is to follow good management practices first, chemical control second. So good management, proper fertilizing, watering, mowing, aeration, and then chemical control when things get a little out of hand. And if you're going to use chemical control, make sure you know what you're treating. Weed identification is critical. Just don't grab the first thing you see off the hardware store shelf for weeds. Make sure you know what you're treating. Are you treating a grassy weed? Is it a perennial weed? Is it an annual weed? There are different products for different weeds. So if you're unsure of what you have in your yard, talk to your local horticulture agent. They can help you identify that weed so you get the proper amount of herbicide and you use less of it. Okay. So now let's talk about lowering those inputs even more, because you're going to have a turfgrass lawn, but you're going to allow some quote unquote weeds. So violets and clover are pretty common. Dandelions, another one. So you can deliberately lower the inputs of your lawn by making a more bee-friendly pollinator lawn, by seeding your turfgrass areas with, when you do the reseeding, with a mix of fescue and clover. So that also helps build the soil, helps with the soil fertility, and provides for the pollinators. So this is a lower input, more pollinator friendly lawn. Now, a word about the clover lawns. So this, I remember a couple years ago, I got a lot of phone calls about replacing turfgrass with clover. And this was an idea that mostly a lot of the work came from the East Coast, where they get a lot more rain than we do. I do not recommend 100% clover lawn. They do not do well in Kansas. So clover used to be, prior to the introduction of herbicides in the 1950s, clover was a very typical component of lawns. Helps with fertility, enriches the soil, improves turf growth. But we've gone to the extreme of trying to get rid of all the clover in our yards. And now we've gone to say, well, now we're going to just plant all clover instead of turfgrass. We'll just get rid of the turfgrass. But this is what it looks like after a year. I went by a lawn near my neighborhood, and they'd done the whole 100% clover, and it looked great that first year. It was buzzing with bees, and this is what it looked like the following year, because clover does not handle the heat and the drought in Kansas. It also goes dormant in the winter, so you end up with bare patches, and then you invite the weeds, and people then are very dissatisfied with their clover lawn. So I've got on the right side there, this side, and just as sort of a quick and easy steps for interseeding clover. So what you can do, though, is you can overseed your lawn essentially with clover. And there are sort of the instructions for that you can look at when you look at the recording, if you want to add clover to your lawn. So here's a field of dandelions, speaking of allowing weeds to grow to support pollinators in your lawn. So, and there have been a lot of studies actually now that show that having these so-called weeds in your lawn, allowing there to be some pollinator plants in a mix with your turfgrass, does support more and more pollinators. Unfortunately, if dandelions look like this, that's lovely. It looks lovely, but mostly what we see is this. And this is not what homeowners generally want, is this kind of pollinator support in their lawn. So when you're thinking about replacing your turfgrass or lowering the inputs, I urge you to go around your neighborhood and take a look at what people are doing, the various practices of lawn maintenance, and think about what it is that you're willing to tolerate. What kind of weed growth are you going to tolerate? Will you tolerate a few dandelions and clover and violets? Look at those lawns and decide for yourself what you can tolerate. So that brings me to the no mow May, that picture of the dandelion. This was a movement that actually started in the United Kingdom and started in this country in Wisconsin, Appleton, Wisconsin to be particular. And neither the UK nor Appleton, Wisconsin matched the conditions in Kansas. So this was a popular thing. I know even some master gardeners were like, okay, no mow May, let's go. We're going to support pollinators. And this is just a picture of somebody who at least mowed the edge there, but let the internal portion of the turfgrass lawn grow up. This doesn't really work in Kansas. So what happens when you do the no mow May is you let your fescue and whatever typically non-native weeds are there grow really high, and then you come along after May and you scalp the lawn and finally to get rid of the tall grass. And what you've done is you've damaged, you've basically stressed out your turf grass there, and it's not going to do well. It's not going to be healthy. Part of it may die. You're going to end up with more bare soil, and you'll end up with that picture that we initially started with. So here's another, again, a picture of a no mow May, or even a no mow until May. People tried to modify that phrase here for Kansas, so maybe not mowing for the month of April. You let your turf grass get that high, you end up scalping it, and you end up with the picture we started. And that's what it looks like the rest of the year. So the other thing I want to say is that when you're letting the turf grass and the weeds in your lawn grow up high, you're supporting a few pollinators with those weeds, but those are non-native weeds. They're not supporting a great deal of pollinators. And what you'd be better off mowing your lawn, keeping it healthy, and planting a pollinator garden. You're going to do more for the pollinators by planting a pollinator garden than you will with the no mow May. So once again, mowing more than a third of a grass height is stressful on the grass, and it's going to lead to more problems. So speaking of alternative lawns, so the bee lawn is a very popular one. And so this is just a florally enhanced lawn. This is something you may have heard about. It's basically from the University of Minnesota. And what that is they've got clover in there, they've got dandelions, they've got violets. So it's a florally enhanced lawn. And here are the features of that lawn: self-heal, white clover, creeping thyme, and then fine fescues. So when you go online and you search for a low maintenance lawn or a no mow lawn, sometimes it's called, what that is a mix of fine fescues and then some of these low growing flowering things like creeping thyme and white clover. They're non-native, but they do provide for pollinators, and these plants can tolerate mowing. So the fine fescue is a festuca like the tall fescue is, but as its name describes, it is a finer grass. You can mow it, you can let it grow a little bit taller, so it means less mowing. It's good for shadier areas. If you've got some shady areas, the downside to the fine fescues is doesn't hold up to traffic. And that's why I ask you to really make sure you know how you're using your yard, is that fine fescue would be a great thing, especially mixed in with these other flowers, the self-heal and the white clover, is a great for a pollinator lawn, but make sure it's in an untrafficked area because fine fescue won't hold up to the traffic. So that's sort of the tall fescue, how to make that a little bit more environmentally sustainable. Let's turn now to some alternative turf grasses. So you don't want to do tall fescue because of the maintenance and the resources it takes. So you're going to turn to a warm season grass, a nut. So zoysia is a popular option. It's a non-native warm season grass. You establish it by plugs or salt. It's heat tolerant, it's drought tolerant, it uses less water, there's less mowing, less fertilizer. If desired, the fertilizer you add to warm season grasses is to green them up a bit, but not necessary. Once you get it established and you've got it to the condition you like, you may have to add fertilizer every so often, but it's much less than a tall fescue lawn. It's a dense grass. So the downside to these warm season grasses, the thing that people don't like is the aesthetics. It greens up later than your fescue grasses, and it's brown in the fall. But if you can get over that aesthetic adjustment, this is an excellent choice, especially for those central Kansas, further west, dry areas, zoysia. And I can't remember the name of the cultivar off the top of my head, but K-State has recently collaborated with other universities to come up with a new zoysia cultivar that works very well. I've seen the test plots. It's a gorgeous grass and it feels really nice. Maybe somebody can put that in the chat if somebody remembers what the cultivar that's sort of a new and up and coming zoysia cultivar. So that is an option for, like I said, heat tolerant, drought tolerant, much less watering, much fewer resources devoted to maintaining a zoysia grass lawn. Now it does travel, meaning you do have to watch your flower beds and your garden beds. So it doesn't, because it'll move through runners and stolons and into your other garden beds. Another option, particularly for central western Kansas and other drier parts of the country, is buffalo grass and blue grama grass. These are native warm season grasses. You establish them in some cases by seed as well as plugs. So with the buffalo grass, particularly, you don't have to mow that at all if you don't want to. Much less fertilizer. You can throw some fertilizer on if they're desired. It is a warm season. Both these are warm season grasses, so which that means they're brown in the fall, they green up late. They do need full sun. So zoysia is a little more shade tolerant than buffalo grass. Buffalo grass really needs that full sun. But if you've got a really sunny spot, it's dry, it's an excellent grass, turf grass to go. This is actually, I'm here in Northeast Kansas, and that top picture on the left is my little piece of sun in my backyard. And I thought I'd try to plant a buffalo grass lawn. Not generally recommended here on the east side of the state because of the moisture, but I have to say I'm pretty pleased with it. I can tolerate such a small area that I was able to weed it by hand without too much effort. It is thinner than a zoysia grass or a tall fescue grass. It's not as dense, so that it does invite weeds. But if you've got a small area, sunny area, you can still do it if you're willing to weed or tolerate. I get a lot of wood sorrel in this, but I don't mind, and I pick it before it goes to seed. So down on the bottom there is a picture from out near Denver. Great dry arid place. The buffalo, they do a buffalo blue grama mix, and that works really well in those dry arid areas. So I do recommend buffalo grass because you don't have to mow, and it looks, and I think it looks nice. A different color, but a nice grass. So some other options. So if you want something that looks like a turf grass, but isn't a turf grass, try sedges. So on the left, there's Carex pennsylvanica. It's something, it'll tolerate dry shade. So you can see it has a grass-like look. It's taller. It's not going to give you that mown look, but it certainly is a great thing for dry shade, and it grows certainly underfoot. It's about 6 inches, and there'll be in the spring it'll blossom, but then that's a very short flowering stalk, and then the rest of it looks like what you see in the picture. And it's a spreading Carex species. Now, a caveat with that is I planted this, so in my backyard, I have the buffalo grass where it's dry and sunny, and in the front, I'm under a bunch of pin oaks. So I tried Carex pennsylvanica instead of turf grass, and I have heavy clay soils, and it does not spread very well, very fast in heavy clay. If you've got another type of soil, particularly a loam soil, more loam soil, then I think it could do quite well in an area like that. Another Carex to try is Carex albicans. These are both, so Carex albicans is native to Kansas, pennsylvanica more towards Missouri, but we can borrow. So Carex albicans is just more tufted, so it's not going to spread like Carex pennsylvanica. But you can certainly, Carex albicans is a beautiful sedge, and I think is a great turf grass replacement. It's a lovely, lovely sedge in maybe small areas, because you do have to start these with plugs, and it can be expensive. So do a little piece at a time. If you're thinking about lawn renovation, turf grass replacement, try thinking about it in smaller sections as you go along, and it might be more digestible that way. So how about some alternative ground covers? Now, this is a bit of a cheat. I took a picture from the UK, Avondale. This is a floral lawn, just because it was the only picture I could find that sort of gave you an idea of an alternative ground cover. So it's a florally enhanced ground cover. So we're not talking about turf grass here. And there is another, I found some more pictures, but I didn't want to lift them without copyright in Western Virginia. So they use chamomile, thyme, yarrow, and self-heal. And the idea here it's called a tapestry lawn. At least that's what it's called, started out being called in the UK. And it's native or non-native plants, but the idea is to create a tapestry of flowering plants, low-growing flowering plants, to substitute for a turf grass lawn, and that supports pollinators. Now, obviously in this picture, it's from the UK, so that's a very moist environment. So one of the things that I think might be fun to do is try to find a mix of plants for your area that you could use to create a tapestry lawn. So what I'm talking about here and why I have this picture here is to focus on those low growing ground covers. We're not trying to create a facsimile of a prairie in this instance, because you of course can just plant a prairie meadow in your yard or a pollinator garden, but I'm focusing on these low growing ground covers as an alternative to a turf grass lawn. So the benefits of this alternative ground covers is supporting the pollinators. Pollinators support a more diverse ecosystem. These alternatives do not require fertilizers, pesticides, and the water. It does not require fertilizer, pesticides, and water that the turf grass requires, and you don't need to use a mower to maintain them. So, and a study that I came across recently has shown by the National Gardening Survey has shown that the Americans planning to turn part of their lawn into native wildflowers doubled between 2019 and 2021. So this is kind of an exciting development. More and more people are interested in doing this. So this is one option. You've got your pollinator garden as an option, but you also have these alternative ground covers. So I also want to point out that you really can make an impact with this. Replacing your turf grass is a refuge for insect pollinators. And you as an individual property owner, and if we put aside the lawn idea for now, even if you're putting out pollinator plants on your back patio of the rental apartment, providing that refuge for insect pollinators makes a significant difference in supporting the local ecosystem. It's something all homeowners, apartment dwellers, anybody can do with even just a pot of plant. But if you're going to replace your turf grass, it makes a really significant difference. I also want to point out this study I found from the Journal of Fish and Wildlife Management, where they did studies that showed that conversion to pollinator habitat was less expensive in the long run over a 10-year period than care for a typical turf grass lawn. So here are some suggestions. Of course, this is suggestions for Kansas. So these are native or native-ish to Kansas. So on the left-hand side, I have a list of plants that can be recommended as ground covers. Now, up in the upper right corner, you see that this is part shade to sun. These are all plants under a foot tall, and these plants require some moisture. And then by comparison, I also have some introduced ones that you might be familiar with as ground covers, like bugleweed and chamomile and creeping jenny. And then on the left, there are some natives that are recommended for ground covers for part shade to sun and moisture environments. I do caution about the wild strawberry that can be rather aggressive, but if you need to really cover an area, that's an excellent choice, but beware, it is very aggressive. The sedum here in this list, Sedum ternatum, is a native. There are lots of sedums out there, non-native sedums that do well for ground covers. Very short plants make a great substitute for a turf grass. Sedum ternatum, however, I have not had much luck with my clay soils. So that's something you have to think about. is really understand your areas, know what kind of soil type you have, and talk to your local horticulture agent about what might work for your particular situation. But here are some suggestions. So, and this is what those plants look like. So I'm talking low growing ground covers, and this replacing, just try to picture your back or front lawn area with these sorts of plants. That Pachyra obovata that I recommended, that's the yellow one in the picture, and I highly recommend that because basil leaves are evergreen, and that pretty little yellow flower is a spring blooming, and then you just remove the dry stalks when it's done, and you have a lovely ground cover in the basil leaves of that Pachyra. Again, this is for part shade, dry, under 1 foot. There are some very familiar introduced species that we use for those situations: Finca, Liriope, Bishop's Hat. And then over on the left are the sedges. So there's the Pennsylvania sedge, the Carex pennsylvanica I recommended, the oak sedge, but here are some other things. The wild strawberry again. Sandflocks is another one to try, and I'll show you the pictures in a minute. I do want to point out that sedges are larval host plants for skipper butterflies and moths. So even if they don't have that showy flower, they're still supporting our pollinators. And there's a picture there of those plants. The sandflocks is down on the bottom right, and the sedges over on the left. And here's dry and sunny. So dry and sunny, you can see that for Kansas, that list is a little bit longer for native plants in dry and sunny Kansas. So these are some some of these really great choices, like rose verbena. Pussy toes, I've had a lot of luck with in my yard. There's actually three species, Antoneria plantaginifolia. There's Parlinii is also another one, and Neglecta is our Kansas native. These are all great for matrix planting. So this is a very, very low spreading ground cover that you can try under taller plants. Purple poppy mallow is always a favorite, but it's not thick. So what the idea is to plant these together and then let the plants sort it out. In this tapestry idea is you plant these maybe in repeating patterns. If you're looking to design your landscape more, is plant these in repeating patterns and then let the plants sort themselves out. You can also mix these in with buffalo grass and blue grama grass to give a little more fuller cover. And here's the picture of those. That middle one is the Antoneria parlinii, the pussy toe species. Now I'm trying out a pollinator lawn for dry sunny locations for Kansas natives, and I'm just going to show you my seed mix that I'm trying to grow and see if this works. I honestly cannot report success at this point in time. I planted it this past winter, and I've gotten the blue grama, of course, has come up, and the yarrow has come up, but I don't believe the other species got the winter cold that they needed to germinate. So I'm hoping to report on that next year to see if it said, but this is what I'm trying out. And I encourage you to try, take a small section of turf grass that you're thinking about replacing, plant in repeating patterns some of the species that you're curious about and see what happens. Take a small area and experiment with this tapestry ground cover idea. And just real quickly, we'll have to wrap this up so we have time for questions. I want to make sure that there's a variety of options for getting rid of the turf grass that you want to get rid of, whether it's just a weedy mess or you want to get rid of some turf grass. You can use occultation, which is putting the black plastic over the grass to kill it. You can use solarization, which is using clear plastic to get rid of what's there now. You can use cardboard and mulch. You can put glyphosate on it to kill the grass. You can use a sod cutter. The best established you're going to get of whatever replacement you're using, whether it's an alternative turf, like you want to switch from tall fescue to zoysia or buffalo grass, or you want to try this sort of tapestry ground cover, it's really key to get the weeds under control first. Make sure you get rid of what's there first. And then you're going to have much, much better establishment and much better luck in transitioning your existing turf grass into something else. So just in summary here of sustainable practice, first and foremost, reduce your turf lawn coverage to areas in the yard that are conducive to growing your chosen turf type grass. Make sure you're using that where you're using your lawn for recreation and where you need to separate and define beds. So first off, shrink that turf lawn coverage. If possible, replace your fescue turf with a warm season grass. Where you're going to keep that turf grass, whether it's a warm season or a cool season, maintain a healthy turf with proper fertilizing, watering, and mowing. You're going to solve most of your problems that way. And then in areas where turf is not needed, replace with sedges or other flowering ground covers to attract and support pollinators. And most important of all, depending on where everybody's coming in from a different part of Kansas or the country, talk to your local horticulture agent and your extension master gardeners. They are a wealth of information. Go visit the demonstration gardens, figure out what's growing in your area and what works for you, and walk around your neighborhood, talk to your neighbors as well. So thank you. I'll go ahead and stop sharing and answer any questions.
All right, we have several questions.
Okay.
The first one is when you talked about using clover in a lawn, you said to seed it after the last frost, but will it germinate? Are there any concerns with that when it's that cold?
Well, after what you're going to do is you're going to cut your existing lawn really low, and after the last frost, that's when you're going to take the seed. You're going to seed over your lawn, and then you're going to make sure that seed you planted stays moist, at least until it germinates, and then you can cut back on the watering a little bit. But make sure you can't just abandon it after that. So keep it moist until it germinates, and then you will have to water it through the summer, and make so at least deeply and infrequently. That's the proper watering thereafter. And that first year, you're going to keep your lawn, the turf grass, mowed a little bit shorter to help that clover get established.
Okay. Another question on clover. They have read that a micro clover trifolium repens variation is much better than other clovers with a fescue seed. What are your thoughts on some of the other clovers?
Well, the micro clover really hasn't, to my knowledge, has not been tested in Kansas. That was a clover that was developed in Maryland, and they've got a lot more rain out there. So I can't recommend it for Kansas at this point. To my knowledge, it hasn't been tried out here, but the heat and the drought conditions we have here, I don't think are conducive to growing that micro clover. Okay.
Back to the question I asked earlier. So you seed the clover in the spring or in the fall?
In the spring.
Okay. What is the best or most effective way to get rid of Bermuda grass? To get started.
Well, you can use any one of those methods that I talked about. It's going to come back if you've got it anywhere near. And so it's just a matter of vigilance, making sure. So killing it any way you can with the solarization, the cardboard, blocking out the sun. Glyphosate herbicide, of course, is going to be a little quicker and easier to get rid of it then. But then once you've tackled that Bermuda grass, if there's a way that you can put a barrier up, that might help prevent it from reinvading. Stones, I'm trying to think, the metal, edging. Thank you. That's what I'm looking for. The word is edging. Or dig a trench, take your spade and make sure there's a bit of a trench between your garden bed or between the area of the Bermuda grass and where you're trying to substitute, and vigilance for the Bermuda grass crossing that barrier.
Okay. I think you touched on it a little bit, but grasses substitutes for full shade areas of the lawn, the sedges, and were there some others you recommend?
Well, there was the Carex pennsylvanica and the Carex albicans. I'm most familiar with those. They've grown really well in shady areas. Maybe not so much heavy clay, but certainly shady areas. There's other sedges to try. You can talk to your local nurseries and see what they have available. Some sedges are good in the shade. Some need more sun. Some need more moisture. The two I recommended, albicans and pennsylvanica, can tolerate some drought. Some sedges need a little bit more moisture than that. So the other, I'm sorry, I lost my track of thought with the other. So other sedges, and then the other grasses for the warm, sunny areas, the zoysia and the buffalo grass.
Okay.
Oh, that's what it was. Fine fescue for the shade. That was the other thing I recommend, was fine fescue. So those are, you can talk to their, K-State has some recommendations for which of those fine fescues might work best in your area. So talk to your horticulture agent about which one.
All right. What are the best native ground covers that work in rockier soils?
Well, that sand phlox is a really good one for rockier areas. So sand phlox, the sedums are really good for rocky areas.
I know I see a lot of pussy toes in our area and
Okay.
places that have a shallower soil as well.
So that's a really good thing. And that's one of the reasons, depending on your area, really talk to your local horticulture agent about what will do well. Visit your demonstration gardens here. Here at Douglas County, we've got a whole ground cover demonstration area that shows what will grow and what it looks like after a couple years growth for different conditions. So, but for rocky, off the top of my head, for rockier areas, that sand phlox and the pussy toes and the sedum.
Okay. I've got one more question. You've mentioned some sedges. So the individual has nut sedge in their iris bed, and she wants to know the differences between the sedges. So those sedges are different than nut sedge, correct?
Correct. We're talking about the genus Carex and the sedges that you want to have in your yard. And so while they're distantly related, it's different. It's a different genus of plant. And getting rid of nut sedge is a problem. And that is a very aggressive sedge. And most people would put that in the category of weed. And it wouldn't be something I would recommend planting. So look, when you're looking for sedges, make sure the genus is Carex.
All right. That is all the questions that we have right now.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Oh, yes, I do have one more question. Does the Carex, those sedges, do they tolerate traffic and being mowed?
It depends on the sedge. So the sedge I'm trying out in my experimental plot is Carex jamesi, and apparently there was a study done. It was out east, but they looked at the mowability, for lack of a better word, of various sedges, and that one came out highly ranked as being able to be mowed. So it really depends on which sedge you're talking about. Some can handle more traffic than others, and some have different tolerances for mowing.
All right. Thank you so much, Sharon. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you, Kala, and also Terry, for moderating this great session. We typically have more questions than we have time for, but we will be sure to link several articles related to this session on our website. We hope these resources will help to answer your questions, but if you need additional information, contact your local K-State Extension office or your local Extension office if you are out of state. Once again, thank you for joining the K-State Garden Hour series hosted by K-State Research and Extension. We are so glad you could be here today to learn about establishing a more environmentally sustainable lawn. We are excited to continue offering this webinar series into 2024. Be watching your email for more details coming soon. You can visit the K-State Garden Hour website to view our recorded Garden Hour archive or to make a tax-deductible donation to support the continuation of this webinar series. This session was recorded and we will be posting it on the website by tomorrow afternoon. After this webinar ends today, you will receive a prompt to take an evaluation survey. Please fill this out. We would greatly appreciate your feedback. If you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at gardenhour@ksu.edu. Thank you again. We hope you continue to tune in on the first Wednesday of each month. Have a great week.